Good morning and welcome to the ETSI virtual event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Hungary is Balázs Betenyi, 3GPP TSG RAN chairman. Balázs was elected as chairman of 3GPP RAN in March 2017 and has successfully led 3GPP to the creation of the first phase of global 5G standards in 2018 and in shaping the further evolution of 5G towards its holistic vision. Welcome, Balázs. Very good to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you, Guy.
What is the current situation with regards to RAN standards work? In terms of the release schedule, where are we right now?
That is an excellent question. I think all of our lives have been upended by the pandemic, and 3GPP is no different. So we had some very nice plans going into the end of release 16 and start of release 17. But eventually, some of the time plans and some of the plans we had to be rethought. But let me go and give this a little bit of a context. So if we think about 5G standardization as a whole and where we are today, we have to go back first to release 15, which was then, of course, the first release in 3GPP that brought 5G with it. And that was very much focusing on mobile broadband and very much focusing on filling the need that came from a shortage of mobile broadband capacity in some of the countries, in particular in Japan and the US. And the 5G deployments you see out there today are very much based on release 15 standards. Now, from there on, release 16 was the next step, and the main goal with release 16 was to fulfill all the ITU requirements, all the IMT 2020 requirements, and we did that. So that was very much a successful endeavor. And we were just about able to finish release 16, as I will show you in a separate slide, before the pandemic hit. Now going forward, with release 17 and release 18, we are now very much focusing on expanding the 5G platform way beyond mobile broadband. In fact, from release 17 onwards, I would venture to say that the majority of the work we do and we undertake are coming from requirements and sectors and segments beyond the traditional cellular ecosystem. So let me go to the detailed release 16 and release 17 schedule. And here exactly is where you can see the impacts of the pandemic. And getting back to your original question. So with release 16, we were just about able to finish all the standards work and all the work that was needed for the 3GPP submission to ITU and IMT 2020, and we finished that back in June. There are still some corrections and change requests coming to release 16, but all in all, I would have to say release 16 was very much a success story in terms of being able to finish a large number of features and functionalities well in time. Now, if we look at release 17, this is where the mainstream of the global crisis hit, and that didn't spare 3GPP, of course. So what we have done is basically in two steps, try to analyze and understand the detailed impacts of having to go virtual in 3GPP and what that means for the timeline. So eventually, what we have come to is all in all a 9-month delay. So you can see here in the figure that for all steps of finishing a release, from physical layer to the stage 3 freeze to the ASM1 protocol freeze, each and every one of these steps would be delayed by 9 months. But one thing we need to remember is what the pandemic has shown us is the cellular ecosystem, the cellular networks, and the role of mobile networks in our society is larger than ever. And that's something the pandemic has shown, and we're trying to, as a standards organization, we're trying to live up to the challenge of delivering functionalities and features even quicker than before to live up to this challenge. I just wanted to show you two pictures here just to give you visuals. So this is how a 3GPP meeting looks like in normal times. So we have several hundred people in the same room, a lot of people discussing offline during the sessions. Essentially, it's a 12 to 16 working day, 16-hour working day with everybody at the same location and lots of discussions going on at the same time. It's a very effective way of coming to agreements, decisions, compromises. But now, of course, this has changed. So just like everybody else, just like this event here now with you, we had to go virtual. But even though 3GPP has gone virtual, 3GPP is still going strong. So we're very much making progress on all the items we have on our plate. We didn't have to cut our content. We're trying to still deliver all the different functionalities and features that we decided we would do back in last December. The means are just a little different. You can see here on this picture, it's email, it's conference calls, it's video calls, it's all kinds of sharing and collaborative tools. But again, the main point is 3GPP is still going and still going strong.
So even allowing for the delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, 5G specifications have seen a much more rapid development timeframe than previous generations, which is testament to the 3GPP processes. But how is this possible? And probably even more importantly, is this sustainable moving forward?
So that is an excellent observation. Indeed, 5G development, not only on the standards front, but starting with innovation and research, and then the standards work we do in 3GPP, but also in deployment, has seen a much more rapid development than any generation we've seen before. So as a testament, I just wanted to show this slide here. So this is a very simplistic comparison of 4G and 5G, 1.5 years after the initial availability of the first batch of standards. So back with 4G and LTE in 2008, 2009, 1.5 years after the availability of the standards, we only had a handful of networks running 4G, and we only had a handful of equipment manufacturers manufacturing handheld devices and smartphones. Now compare that to 5G, and this is what you can see here on this map. And this map is pretty recent, but is already outdated. There are much more networks now live than what you see here on this picture. But essentially, we have 60, 70, almost 80 networks now running 5G worldwide, and almost as many different equipment manufacturers, manufacturing smartphones and other devices. So you can see the major shift in the speed whereby deployments are coming to the field with 5G compared to previous generations.
What are the key ingredients of 5G standards development moving forward, and how will these map onto future 3GPP releases?
So going forward, the key focus that we have, not only in standards, but in terms of innovation, research, that also then translates into eventual standards work and then onto the field with deployments, is the fulfillment of the holistic 5G vision. And the 5G vision spans way beyond mobile broadband. So 5G is not just a turbocharged 4G, it's not just LTE on steroids, it's a whole lot more. So with 5G, we really are trying to go after a lot of different industry segments, to have those segments utilize 5G in a way that makes their business even more profitable and even more efficient. So this is a summary slide on all the different areas where 5G technology innovation is very much ongoing and booming in 3GPP. So starting with the bread and butter of cellular ecosystem, if I want to call that, mobile broadband is still very much in the center of a lot of things we do in 3GPP standards. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is have common solutions and common mechanisms and functionalities that translates to all these different innovation areas. The second is multicast. With multicast, we're trying to apply a major learning back from LTE. With LTE, the main reason, if you ask me, the main reason multicast wasn't successful with LTE is that we made it too specialized. LTE-based multicast and BMS was very special to that particular case. It had different functionalities from the ground up, meaning already in the hardware you needed different functionalities, and then the physical layer, and it was just not a viable way to do this. We're trying to make sure the economies of scale remain with 5G, so We're not looking for specialized solutions. We're looking for one common platform, and then all the different add-ons that make it viable for a particular segment would come in software and higher layers. And this is exactly what we're now trying to do with multicast in 5G. Satellite is also a major addition to the 5G ecosystem. For decades, the cellular ecosystem and the satellite ecosystem were at odds with each other, primarily because of spectrum. But those days are now hopefully behind us, and we started to cooperate very efficiently. Essentially, the satellite ecosystem, the satellite operators and vendors came to 3GPP with the goal of utilizing 5G radio as such for satellite. And we have had already studies in the last couple of years in 3GPP, and now we reach the stage of doing normative work for satellite access using 5G, a major step forward on this. Industrial IoT, if you ask me what is perhaps the most important element of making 5G successful, is that we make 5G successful for industries, for essentially for manufacturing, and all kinds of, from the car industry to agriculture, etc. To me, if we're successful in that, we were successful with 5G. So what we're trying to do with standards is to add all the different pieces and functionalities so that the different factory settings and industry users can migrate their communication means over to 5G. So whenever there was like a wired Ethernet connection between or across the assembly lines, for example, that would be replaced by 5G. You would have different autonomous vehicles running in the factory using 5G-based positioning. So essentially, industrial IoT with 5G is one of the key cornerstones of what we do in 3GPP also going forward. So just moving on some of the other functionalities we're addressing, Sidelink is something we started to address already with 4G. So that Sidelink means the direct communication between devices without the direct involvement of the network. Typical use cases here are the autonomous or autonomous driving, so the vehicular use case where cars would be communicating with each other, of course communicating also with the network, and with the combination of the two, at the end of the day, making autonomous driving available. Now we're doing this with 5G. We started to do this with 5G as well, building a whole lot more sophistication into these functionalities. With 4G, we have some basic capabilities possible with road safety, etc. But with 5G, we're building towards a full autonomous, fully safe ecosystem that not only involves cars, but also involves pedestrians and other actors of the ecosystem. Unlicensed spectrum is turning out to be a pretty important part of 5G. So typically, a cellular ecosystem builds on spectrum that is licensed by governments, but we wanted to make 5G also usable for unlicensed spectrum, so the same spectrum bands that Wi-Fi uses, for example. So it remains to be seen exactly how this would be utilized, but one typical use case could be, again, factories and industry usage. With 4G, we have already seen the explosion of variables and different kind of device types. What we see with 5G is just a multiplication of these. And we want to make sure that the network and the ecosystem optimally supports these different types of devices. So we're very much focusing on that and making that happen with release 17 and eventually with release 18. Positioning, I've already alluded to. It's very important that indoors in the factory environment, as well as outdoors for your typical commercial use cases, we don't have to rely on GPS, but we also have a native 5G cellular-based positioning system. And last but not least, extended reality. To me, if I want to point out one key functionality that would be the most notable piece of functionality for the everyday person, for the layman, would be extended reality. So with the different glasses and different kind of devices that are coming out, I just read the other day how successful the recently launched virtual reality glasses that Facebook and Qualcomm together launched. This to me is already showing the potential future success of this technology or phenomenon, if you want to call it that way. And again, I believe that from a commercial standpoint, this will be um, the marker of 5G in people's minds.
Thank you, Balazs. Now, it's also important, as you said, that we encourage and support innovation and research. How does 3GPP work and incorporate these resources? Are there any research body members of 3GPP?
So innovation and research is at the bedrock of the success of standardization. Typically, the way 3GPP is set up, much of the research and much of the innovation comes through individual member companies, your Nokias, your Ericssons, your Qualcomms, your Apples, etc. But we also have research bodies joining 3GPP, typically from different regions, like from Korea, from Taiwan, from China, but also from the US. Not only research institutes, but also universities coming in. Typically, in terms of contribution, in terms of bringing in new innovation into standards, that still does happen mainly through the individual member companies. But it's very important that these research institutes come to 3GPP, experience how standards work is done firsthand, so they can basically adjust and direct their research so that they can bring more and more sort of useful innovation into the ecosystem.
Now, there are new factors at play in the RAN right now. For example, virtualization, open interfaces, suggestions from Greenfield operators that they want more innovation, they want faster technology integration. Do you see these as challenges or opportunities for your work?
So with 5G, the horizon or the number of players that are coming into standards has grown exponentially. And exactly the Greenfield operators basically actors that have that don't have a legacy footprint. They can take 5G and basically run with it without having to adhere to a legacy footprint or having to worry about inner working. And we have already seen that these kind of players are really bringing in a lot of different innovative concepts of how you can actually build your network in the most flexible way. I mean, one thing we have learned in 3GPP that with every generation, the amount of different deployments grows exponentially, and that's not different with 5G. And this is exactly where the different open interfaces and virtualization is very, very important, because through that you can actually support a much wider range of network deployments. So having all these open interfaces in and around the radio and the traditional base station, and then the virtualization and the cloud RAN technologies, again, makes it much easier for 5G to be adopted and deployed by Greenfield operators, industries, just new segments in general. So it is a critical development in the ecosystem altogether, and we very much follow that and drive that in 3GPP.
Now, whilst there are still many grappling with the introduction and launch of 5G, there's widespread interest in what comes next, i.e. 6G, and the need to start making provisional plans now. When would you expect to see 6G type technologies make their way into the 3GPP RAN process?
So because of the speed of innovation and just the amount of enthusiasm behind expanding the cellular ecosystem, the buzzword 6G is already out there. And that's perhaps not so surprising. If we look at sort of how history has worked so far, typically a generation spans around 10 years of the ecosystem's life. So essentially what that leads me to believe that in about 10 years of where 5G has started, there would be 6G starting. Now, if I want to go with an analogy from the vehicular ecosystem, you have like a BMW, and that typically has like a mid-life cycle refresh. Typically, we do something actually similar with cellular standards. So we start with a generation. There are 1, 2, maybe 3 releases to address the immediate need, and then there is like sort of a second step. I would call it maybe 5.5G. That paves the way towards the next generation. So we do another 1, 2, maybe 3 releases under this 5.5G. before we actually formally launch towards a new generation. Whether it will happen exactly this way with 5G, maybe 5.5 and 6G, that remains to be seen. But what we can already see is that the enthusiasm and sort of the momentum behind building the next generation is perhaps larger than anywhere previously in history. So maybe the 10-year life cycle will actually be a little bit quicker this time. But there's still plenty to do in 5G. So we're not running out of work or running out of concepts in the 5G space anytime soon.
Oh yes, plenty of work still to do. Thank you very much, Balázs. Very informative. We'll see you again for our panel discussion later today. Now, over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, panel discussions and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, of course, we are taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day, and you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for it to begin. Now, stay with us, please, for our next session, an interview with Anita Dola, who is CEO of NGMN. And she'll be discussing the vision and future plans for the association. Goodbye for now.